Hello everybody and welcome to my final Life is Strange True Colors verdict video, which is probably not going to be a very long video because, well, it's not a very long game, so I don't really have that much to say about it. But there's a few things that I would like to talk about. But before I get into that, maybe one quick word about the bonus episode or DLC or whatever you want to call it. I think it's called Wavelength, and it's a story focused on Steph. And yeah, I gotta admit, I completely forgot about that one. So I only remembered that it existed after I already made my schedule announcement. So I don't really want to change this now, which means I will probably play this one just for myself off camera, but I'm not going to make like a separate let's play for that bonus episode. So I'm sorry if you were looking forward to that, but yeah, I completely forgot that existed. Anyway, now let's get to my actual discussion part. As always, I'm going to start with the basic technical aspects of the game, like graphics, sound, gameplay. And I will be comparing this game a lot to the first game of the series. Not because I don't think that, True Colors can't stand on its own, but it makes kind of sense to see how they changed and maybe improved the game compared to the first one. Of course, I kind of skipped a game in between, which is Life is Strange 2, but still, I will make some comparisons here. And I would say in terms of the technical aspects, they didn't really change a lot. Obviously, I think the major change is the supernatural power of your protagonist, but I will talk about this a little bit more later. Other than that, the graphical style is similar. I think it's a bit more detailed in this one. Everything is a bit prettier, I guess. But it is, in general terms, like a similar style. And one thing that I noticed is definitely improved compared to the first game, is the facial animations. As a matter of fact, I think I remember singling out the facial animations in my verdict video of the first game as being not so great because they were pretty stiff and many faces barely got any animation at all. But in this one, they were actually really, really good. So that was a huge improvement compared to the first game. The voice acting was really good in this one. I seem to remember that the first one had pretty decent voice acting as well, but again, I feel it was a bit better in this one. The music was fitting, and the gameplay, apart from the main supernatural power, was essentially unchanged, right? You would walk around, you could look at some stuff, you could pick dialogue options, and every now and then you had to make a big decision. So it's a basic, simple gameplay, and it does what it should do. So again, not much to say about this. Again, one thing that I noticed that has changed compared to the first game is that you had more of an open area, like you had the town or like the main street of town, which you could explore pretty freely and go in and out of buildings. You didn't really have that in the first game, where you were usually limited to like one specific place, like a room or a house. So it felt a bit more open-worldy almost, because you could, walk around in a fairly large area and, explore the way you wanted. So again, that was a pretty neat improvement. Do I have anything to criticize about the general gameplay? Not really. Like I said, it's doing what it's supposed to do. The question whether you actually like this kind of gameplay is a different one, but I mean, I knew what I was getting into, so I don't have a problem with that, walk around, look at stuff, pick your decisions. Maybe one minor thing, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel that in this game the cutscenes were longer than before, so you had longer periods of time where you didn't really do anything, you were just watching the game, and then every now and then you could like click one dialogue option. So it did sometimes feel maybe a little bit too much like, an interactive movie. I mean, it's kind of part of the overall gameplay, and I remember that this was sort of the same in the first game. But sometimes I felt in this game some of these cutscenes where you couldn't really do anything were maybe a little bit too long. So that would be a minor point of criticism. Other than that, no, I don't really have much to criticize. Maybe the fact that sometimes the save points are at weird moments. So if you quit the game at the wrong moment, you have to replay like a whole bunch of stuff. And if you have to replay like a cutscene or like a dialogue scene, you can't even skip dialogue or, cutscenes you've seen already. You have to watch all of it again. And this happened to me like on 2 or 3 occasions. Of course, if you're not playing for a Let's Play, you can just say, okay, I'm going to continue play until I found a safe spot. But in my case, sometimes I just, wanted to stop playing because I, wanted to end my episode. I guess this doesn't really apply to most other casual players. So, but still, I feel as a general rule, save points should be at the end of cutscenes and not before them or somewhere in between them. Just saying. But yeah, let's talk about like the main gameplay function, which is the supernatural ability of your protagonist. So in the first game we had that time rewind mechanic, and now in this game we had the ability to see people's emotions and read their thoughts, and then maybe via interacting with certain objects you could like change their mood or whatever. And if I compare these two, I have to admit, the time rewind mechanic was probably a bit more interesting, and it had more like actual gameplay implications. So I think while the, empathy, or how you want to call it, seeing emotions was interesting, it wasn't quite as clever as the time rewind in the first game. I also feel that the time rewind mechanic certainly had more potential in it, so I feel they actually could have used this for another game and, see what else they could do with that kind of gameplay mechanic. But I can also understand that they wanted to try something new and not, recycle the same skill again. And honestly, I feel coming up with like a similarly clever mechanic is probably not easy. You can't catch lightning in a bottle twice. And, the first time they use this, being able to rewind your decisions and try another decision. I guess you can't really come up with something like that again. And, the empathy was nice. It just didn't feel quite as clever as the time rewind. But still, I thought it was an interesting idea, and I enjoyed it well enough. So I guess that's really all I have to say about the general gameplay. For the most part, it was the same as in the first game. The supernatural ability may not have been quite as interesting as in the first game, but they had other, improvements in terms of graphics, facial animations, and so on. So I would call it even in this regard. Now let's talk about the story. And one thing that I noticed about the story is that it certainly had a few similarities to the first game. There were certain elements that felt very familiar. I mean, first of all, the setting in like a small idyllic town. I would even argue that Haven Springs was more idyllic than Arcadia Bay. But it was kind of a similar setting, small town where people knew each other and so on. Then obviously you have Steph, who was, well, maybe a little bit too much like Chloe. I can't be the only one who noticed the similarities here. As a matter of fact, I think I mentioned that the first time we saw her because she was wearing like that beanie or whatever, kind of like Chloe always did. So it's kind of a similar archetype, I suppose. But I mean, there's other elements that seem familiar. We have Typhoon as like the evil corporation, and in the first game you had like, what were they called? The Prescott Foundation, and I think they were building like real estate somewhere, and I think they were also like overfishing the bay and stuff like that. I mean, the Prescott Foundation in the first game didn't really play an important role. It was more like in the background a little bit compared to Typhoon, but you know, it's a similar element, right? And then obviously you had like the seemingly nice and supportive guy who turned out to be like the villain. In the first game it was the teacher. What was his name? Mr. Jefferson, right? In this game it was Jet. Although I would argue that the teacher in the first game, he seemed a little bit more suspicious at first already. I mean, his charm and supportiveness always felt a little bit off, a little bit fake. Compared to that, Jet actually felt a lot more genuine. So his betrayal was actually a lot more surprising than Mr. Jefferson's. He definitely gave off some weird vibes the entire time already. Now, that doesn't mean that Jet's reveal as like the villain, quote unquote, was contrived or, you know, a plot twist that didn't make any sense. Because if you look back at it, I'm sure you can find some hints towards this. I mean, the obvious hint was the fact that in the lab he played like the king who turned out to be the villain. I mean, that was, on the one hand, like a very obvious, you know, hint towards that. But it also was very hidden because, you know, it was just a game, it was a lab. So I guess you probably should be able to go through the game again and maybe watch Jet and remarks about Jet, and maybe you will be able to find a few hints that point towards, you know, the truth. But most importantly, it doesn't seem unbelievable, you know, because of all the people, he seemed to be the one most involved in like the whole mining business, you know, apart from, you know, Diane and Meg. But they were pretty obvious from the beginning. You know, I mentioned that during the game that it's a little bit too obvious that the main suspect for our crime is the one person who was like a jerk from the beginning. I'm pretty sure he's not like the main culprit here, and we were right about that. But I feel, even though the plot twist came unexpected, it's a twist that kind of makes sense, and that's usually like a good sign, right? So I would say it's a well-constructed plot twist, such as it is. So yeah, as I mentioned, there are certainly a number of similarities between the story of this game and the previous game. Just the whole idea that, you know, you have these normal random people investigating a crime. In the first game it was like the disappearance of I forgot her name, Chloe's girlfriend, right? And in this game it was like the death of Gabe. So yeah, there are certain elements that are similar, and considering that, it's actually surprising that this game did not feel derivative or just like a repeat of the first game. It actually felt like a pretty fresh and unique story, and it didn't feel just like a copy of the first game, even though it had all these familiar elements. Is there anything that I would criticize about the story? Yeah, I would say that there were a few moments when the story certainly felt a little bit too constructed and a little bit too contrived. I mentioned some of these moments during the game already, so it seemed surprisingly naive of Alex and the others to take a stolen USB stick to the police, for example. Or, you know, the whole scene with Pike. where you were given a decision that was not an either-or decision. These choices that you were given were not mutually exclusive. And it wasn't really explained why you had to pick one of those and why not, both of them or none of them. Or, the whole thing of 7 people dying in a mining accident, and somehow you are able to cover this up. So there were certainly some elements in the story that felt a little bit, okay, I have some questions about this. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I wouldn't say it's like a major issue for the most part. But I thought I would, point it out that sometimes the story was a little bit overly constructed, maybe. But I also feel that, like, the story, as in, like, the investigation of, the accident and the whole crime story, wasn't even, like, the major part of the game. I mean, it was there to give the game, like, an actual story. But I feel in the end, the point of the game was not just to solve a crime or whatever, but it's about, relationships and about Alex's coming to terms with her powers. And, as I said, one of the major themes of the game was finding a home, finding a place where you belong to. So I think I will not, like, try to overanalyze the holes in the crime story because it's not the most important part of the game. And the other part of the game, like the emotional part, Alex trying to find a place where she belongs, I think that was all pretty well done. We had this very intense and emotional climax where she confronted Jed. And while it was like also the climax of the crime story, I think it's more important that it also was like the climax of Alex's character story, because, she had all these people standing up for her, and this is something that she never really had before. She had Gabe, but then Gabe was gone, and she always felt rejected, and, friends left her when they found out about her powers and whatever. So I think it wasn't so much about her solving that crime, but her seeing that she had the support of all these people and that she finally had, a place where she could belong to and where she could stay. Even if she decides to leave town later, I mean, maybe she will leave with Steph or Ryan or whatever. But still, I feel the emotional message is more important here than trying to find out what happened during that explosion. So, yeah, I would say the story was fine. Something that I noticed that was different from, like, the previous game, and I would even say better than the previous game, they didn't feel the need to have, like, a huge dramatic decision at the end. I mean, the final decision was basically about staying in Haven Springs or leaving. If you may remember, in the first game, the big final decision was to sacrifice Town or to sacrifice Chloe. And I was rather unhappy with that decision because whatever option you picked, it would kind of undo all the stuff that you did in this game, either because you killed all the people that you had helped during this game by just, sacrificing the entire town, or you would literally undo everything you did by rewinding time back to the beginning and letting Chloe die. So the ending of the first game was certainly one of the major weak points of the game, because apparently they felt the need to have like this huge final decisive decision at the end, and they didn't make the same mistake again. As a matter of fact, I feel, decision-based games shouldn't really need this big final decision at the end to determine the outcome of the game, because that kind of invalidates all the other decisions you made before. I mean, you could argue that Mass Effect kind of had the same problem at the end, without getting into much spoiler territory here if you haven't played this game yet, but it kind of gets accused of the same problem, that, you make a decision at the end that kind of renders all the other decisions you made previously sort of useless because they don't really play a role anymore. And in this case, I didn't really get the feeling that this was the case. So I'm guessing that the people who stand up for you during the town hall meeting will react based on certain interactions that you had with them and certain decisions that you made. Now, I'm not sure what happens if like no one backs you or only a few people stand up for you, if that somehow affects the way that the game ends, but it may at least affect Alex's decision of staying or leaving. You know, if no one stands up for her during that council meeting, she might be more inclined to leave this place and not stay there. But yeah, I think the ending of this game was definitely better than in the first one. So that gets a thumbs up from me. I also noticed that they didn't really try to include unnecessary, mysterious, supernatural elements into this game compared to the first one. I mean, in the first one, we had, apart from like the main supernatural powers, other weird stuff going on, like ghost deers and, you know, that hurricane that was going to destroy Arcadia Bay. I mean, they were kind of trying to rationalize it in a scientific way by pointing to, I don't know, butterfly effect and chaos theory, but it never really felt all that believable. It felt more like some supernatural event that happened because you were using your powers. And I mean, it even had like stuff like an eclipse that wasn't supposed to happen. And I mean, you can't explain that with butterfly effect. I mean, weather affected by minor changes and random events, okay. But a solar eclipse is not based on random chance. It's maybe one of the most predictable things in our solar system. And no butterfly effect is going to change the course of planets or the way the Earth rotates around the sun, right? So they didn't even try to do it in this game. I mean, you could maybe argue Alex talking to Gabe at the end was kind of supernatural, but you could see this as like an inner monologue of Alex and not so much her actually talking to Gabe's ghost, right? And I actually like this because while on the one hand these additional supernatural elements gave a bit of mystery to the whole story and setting, it also left you with a lot of questions that they never even bothered to answer. So I'm fine with the fact that they didn't include it this time. As a matter of fact, they also did a somewhat better job at explaining Alex's power in this case. I mean, we never really learned about Max's power in the first game, why she got it, why this specific power. It seemed fairly random, you know, why she had suddenly the ability to turn back time. In case of Alex, it wasn't really explained why she had it, but they at least gave you a bit of insight into her past and, you know, when she felt these strong emotions. So at least it gave us a little bit of an explanation why she had this specific power, maybe. I mean, it's still supernatural and essentially unexplained, but it didn't feel quite as random as the one that they gave to Max, right? So that's maybe another plus point. So yeah, I guess that's really all that I gotta say about this. I would say that for the most part, I did enjoy this game more than the first one. Even though I will say that gameplay-wise, the time rewind mechanic was actually more interesting and has more replay value in my opinion, because I didn't even rewind like every decision that I made. So you can play around with that one a lot more than with the empathy thing in this game. So maybe overall I would say they're kind of both on the same level. I think this game has like overall better story, looks better, many technical aspects are improved, and has a much better ending. but the first one had like the better gameplay technique with the time rewind. So yeah, it's kind of hard to really rank them, to be honest. But yeah, I guess that's all I want to say about this. If you have any thoughts on this game, if you agree with my review and my opinion or not, leave a comment. And yeah, I have already given you my schedule for the upcoming days. As always, I will take one day off in between Let's Plays. Let me quickly see the dates, not that I'm giving you any wrong information here. So the Wednesday, which is the 19th, is going to be a day off. And then on Friday the 21st, I'm going to start the next Let's Play, which is going to be Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The final Assassin's Creed game, for now anyway. So I hope you're looking forward to that. And until then, as always, thank you for watching, and see you again next time.